You're gonna want to hear this, Diane said, swirling her wine like she was about to deliver the punchline to some sitcom joke. She was sitting across from me, wearing that same smug little smile I remembered from before the divorce. Same pearl earrings, same tight grip on every conversation. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just kept cutting into the roast chicken, letting the steam blur the edge of my glasses. My name is Jason Bennett. I'm 65 years old. I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I've spent the last 18 years raising a girl who was never mine. Not by blood anyway. But I was there for every milestone, every emergency, every scraped knee and midnight panic. Natalie always called me Dad. Until tonight. Natalie was sitting 2 seats to my left, tucked between her fiancé, Greg, and her mother. She looked nervous, like she knew what was coming but didn't have the guts to stop it. Diane patted her hand like a game show host prodding the next contestant. Well, Diane said, turning to Natalie. Tell him. You said you wanted to. Natalie took a sip of water. Her hand shook just enough to make the ice clink against the glass. I've been thinking a lot about the wedding, she said, voice tight, rehearsed. And I want Alan to walk me down the aisle. The room froze. Greg looked straight down at his plate. Diane, meanwhile, leaned back with her arms crossed like she'd just won something. I didn't react. Not externally, anyway. Internally, it felt like someone dropped a cinder block onto my chest. But all I did was nod slowly and wipe my mouth with my napkin. Okay, I said. One word. Calm. Even. Diane's face flickered. She'd been waiting for a scene. Tears. Anger. Something dramatic she could spin to her advantage later. But I gave her nothing. Natalie rushed to fill the silence. I mean, I love you. You'll still be there, obviously. I've always wanted my real dad to have that moment. Real dad. That was the part that stuck in my head. Not the walking down the aisle. Not even Alan's name. Just those 2 words. I thought back to all the real dad moments Alan missed, the science fairs, the ER visits, the sleepless nights when she had that bronchitis scare in 7th grade. I thought about the time I drove 6 hours in the snow because she called me crying after a breakup. I showed up with chicken soup and a portable heater because her dorm heat was busted. But sure, Alan was the real dad. I took a sip of water and looked around the table. My grandson-to-be was stabbing his broccoli with a fork like he wished it would disappear. Diane was watching me like a hawk, hoping for a crack. And Natalie, poor Natalie, looked like she was waiting for someone to either scream or save her. I did neither. Instead, I smiled gently, turned to Greg, and asked, "How's work treating you these days?" Greg blinked. It's good. Busy." "That's good," I said. "Busy is better than bored." Natalie looked like she might cry. I didn't comfort her. I just returned to my dinner, letting the hum of other conversations take over. For the rest of the meal, I barely said a word. I just listened, really listened, to the rhythm of a family I no longer recognized. When dessert came, Diane tried to bring it back up. "I know it's a lot to process, Jason, but..." I raised a hand. Not angry, just firm. "It's not necessary." She tilted her head. "We thought you'd understand." "I do," I said. "Completely." I didn't look at Natalie. I didn't need to. I could already feel the weight of 18 years sliding off my shoulders. After dinner, I helped clear the plates like I always did. Took my time rinsing the gravy off the good china. Natalie came up behind me near the sink. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. I nodded, but I didn't turn around. "Don't worry," I said. "You didn't." I lied. Of course I did. But it wasn't the kind of hurt that called for shouting or slammed doors. It was the quiet kind. The kind that makes you sit alone in the dark afterward, wondering what else you mistook for love. She touched my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I just dried my hands and handed her the dish rag. "You should get back to your guests," I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, but then Greg called her from the living room, and she went. I walked to the coat rack, grabbed my jacket, and stood for a moment looking at the old family photo that still hung by the front door. Me, Diane, and a gap-toothed Natalie, all grinning at some long-forgotten beach. I remembered the day. I remembered the weather. I remembered paying for that whole trip because Diane said Alan was between jobs. I reached out and straightened the frame. Then I turned and left, already forming the plan that would carry me out of all of it. The wedding, the house, the role I had been cast in without consent. The role of the placeholder. Because that was the moment I realized something important. I wasn't invited to walk Natalie down the aisle, but I could still choose to walk away. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even bother getting undressed. I just sat in the recliner in my study, staring at the books I never had time to read, the souvenirs from family trips, the graduation photo of Natalie in her cap and gown, beaming with her arms around me. That one I took down. By 4:15 a.m., I had already started. I went into the guest room closet and pulled out the tuxedo bag. It was still zipped, untouched since the fitting 2 months ago. I laid it across the bed and stared at it for a moment, then turned and walked out. Back in the study, I powered on the desktop. First thing, Delta Airlines. I canceled my flight to Chicago for the wedding weekend. Then I opened a new tab and started searching for solo trips in Europe. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped Diane plan their honeymoon in Italy, back when we were still pretending to be good at being married. Positano popped up in a list of quiet getaways for the newly single and soul-tired. That sounded about right. Booked it. 1 carry-on. No checked bags. No return date set. Next, the wedding folder. I had it all in one place. The receipts for the caterer, the RSVP spreadsheet Diane had emailed me with little notes like, "Don't forget Cousin Barb is vegan now," and the draft of the speech I'd been working on for weeks. "You were never mine by blood," it began. "But from the moment you crawled into my lap and fell asleep at age 5, I knew I'd never leave you." I printed the speech, folded it once, left it on the kitchen table. Next to it, I left a manila envelope neatly labeled. Inside, the passwords to our shared accounts, notes on the college fund, the utilities I had been managing remotely, and the last month's payments for everything. I even included the wedding contributions I made, itemized and highlighted. It wasn't about the money. It was about closure. I emptied the contents of one dresser drawer into my duffel bag. A few button-downs, jeans, my passport, chargers, sunglasses. I skipped toiletries. I'd buy them there. Whatever I didn't have, I'd learned to live without. At 5:11 a.m. on the dot, I stood at the front door. The sky outside was still dark. The kind of quiet where even the birds hadn't started their routines yet. I stood there for a second, one hand on the knob, listening for any noise in the house. None. Good. I thought about leaving a note. A simple one. Maybe something like, "I won't be at the wedding. Wishing you the best." But it felt redundant. The toast said enough. I opened the door and stepped into the cool morning air. The grass sparkled with dew, the kind Natalie used to run barefoot through when she was 7. I remember telling her to be careful, and her yelling back, "Why? The earth likes my feet." I smiled at the memory, then let it go. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back at the porch. Didn't glance at the window to see if a curtain had moved. There was no need. I played the role long enough. When the plane took off that evening, I didn't feel relief or freedom. Not yet. What I felt was blank. Like I had emptied out every piece of myself that used to ache. And now there was just silence. I slept the entire flight. When we landed in Naples, the air smelled like ocean salt and warm stone. I turned on my phone long enough to text my hotel. "Arriving tonight. No rush. Just want a quiet room with a view." Then I turned the phone back off. Somewhere in Richmond, Diane would be waking up and finding the note on the table. Maybe she'd think I'd gone out for breakfast. Maybe she'd even smirk, convinced I was being petty. Let her. Maybe Natalie would read the toast. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd think it was some guilt trip. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd read the whole thing and feel what I felt when she said those words at dinner. Real dad. I'd written the toast without knowing I'd never give it. But maybe it was never meant to be heard out loud. Some truths are too heavy for microphones. I unpacked in silence, hung my few shirts in the tiny wardrobe, took a shower and stood under the water long enough to forget what day it was. That night, I walked to the cliffs just before sunset. The Mediterranean stretched out in front of me, endless and deep and mercifully indifferent. I sat on a bench and watched the water for a long time. I didn't think about the wedding. I didn't wonder how the rehearsal was going. I didn't picture Alan trying to fit into a tux he probably hadn't worn since 1998. I just breathed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath waiting to be loved. I was done waiting. The pictures hit social media before the jet lag even wore off. Diane had picked up Alan from the airport and, to no one's surprise, used my old car to do it. The silver Lexus I signed over in the divorce, even though I'd paid it off years ago. There they were in the arrival's pickup lane, her leaning against the hood like it was some kind of reunion movie poster, and Alan grinning with that empty, performative confidence he always carried like a badge. His suitcase looked like it hadn't been used since Y2K. He wore a t-shirt that said, "Best Dad Ever," in peeling white letters, and a pair of wraparound sunglasses that gave him the air of a man who hadn't changed since his last child support check bounced. From the moment he arrived, it became clear he didn't know how to play the part. "Pumpkin!" he shouted across the hotel lobby when he first saw Natalie. She flinched so hard she nearly dropped her makeup bag. "There's my baby girl. Look at you. Like a little princess about to marry Prince Email or whatever his name is." "Greg," she corrected, trying to smile. "His name is Greg." "That's right, Greg." Right, Alan said, slapping him on the back so hard that Greg nearly dropped his phone. "You taking good care of my little girl, huh?" Natalie laughed nervously. It was the kind of laugh you give a waiter who messes up your order but still stands there smiling. From what I heard later, and trust me, people love sharing when a ghost goes missing, the rehearsal dinner was a mess. Alan arrived 20 minutes late. Claimed traffic, even though the hotel was 4 blocks away. He gave a toast with a beer in one hand and a story about Natalie's imaginary childhood nickname, Pompadour. No one had ever heard it before. Natalie looked mortified. "And now," he said, raising his glass, "I get to walk my little girl down the aisle like I should have done years ago. I mean, not that I wasn't around. I was. Sometimes. Things happen. Life, you know?" Diane jumped in before he could dig any deeper. "We're just so grateful Jason could support her all those years," she said with a tight smile, as if I'd been some kind of long-term babysitter. No one questioned where I was, at least not out loud. But the story Diane told was already making the rounds. "He's overseas for work," she said with a practiced sigh. "Last minute. You know Jason, always putting business first." There was a little pity in some faces, a little confusion in others. Natalie didn't say much. She kept smiling, nodding, her face locked in that strange, artificial expression that brides wear when they're too overwhelmed to protest anything. But the cracks were already starting to show. One of the groomsmen, Greg's college buddy, Sam, told someone that he caught Natalie alone in the coat room, staring at her phone like it was about to punch her in the face. When he asked if she was okay, she just smiled and said, "It's all fine. Really. I used to know that smile. I'd seen it when she broke her arm at summer camp and tried to act brave for the nurses. I saw it at 13 when she found out Alan bailed on the beach trip again and said, 'It's cool. We didn't need him anyway.' Now she was wearing that smile for an audience." Meanwhile, Alan couldn't remember anyone's name. Kept calling Greg's mom Linda, when her name was actually Leslie. Said he was stoked for the ceremony and might even cry a little if the DJ played that one Goo Goo Dolls song from the 90s. By the end of the night, Greg's dad reportedly asked Diane, "Are we sure this guy's up to it?" Diane didn't answer, just topped off her wine and said, "It'll be fine. It has to be." The most telling detail came from the photographer, some kid in his 20s with a camera too expensive for his shoes. He told one of the bridesmaids that Natalie had insisted on only a handful of posed photos with Alan. "Keep it simple," she'd said. "Quick and casual. No one asked for a father-daughter shot." And no one seemed to notice that Jason Bennett, the man who raised her, was missing from every frame. But I noticed. From my little balcony in Positano, I watched it all unfold. Silent, detached, like a man reading his own obituary in the newspaper and realizing the details are all wrong. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather and unraveling nerves. The venue was a sprawling estate outside of Chicago, all white columns and manicured lawns. Like it had been pulled from a bridal magazine someone left out too long in the rain. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock sharp. Flowers were supposed to arrive by noon. They didn't. Diane was already on edge when she found out the florist had the wrong delivery address. Natalie was pacing in a satin robe, reapplying lip balm every 10 minutes and trying not to cry. Greg had locked himself in the groom's suite with his best man and a bottle of bourbon. "Just one glass," he'd said. But the bottle was half empty by the time the photographer showed up. And Alan? Alan was missing. No one had seen him since the night before. His hotel room was empty. His phone went straight to voicemail. Diane kept assuring people, "He's probably just taking a walk, clearing his head." Natalie didn't look convinced. Neither did anyone else. It wasn't until 2:15 that someone thought to check the groomsman's suite, a side room off the main hall that had been repurposed as overflow storage. That's where they found him. Alan was slumped on a leather couch, snoring softly, an empty mini bottle of Jack Daniels still clutched in one hand. His shirt was half untucked. One sock was missing. Greg's best man, Sam, was the one who called it. "We've got a situation," he said, walking into the bridal suite with all the confidence of someone about to announce a fire. Diane tried to smooth things over. "He's just tired. Jet lag and all that." Natalie stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "He's drunk," she said flatly. "He smells like a bar floor." "No," Diane insisted, adjusting her necklace like it was the real issue. "He's just overwhelmed. You know how emotional men get about weddings." The bridesmaids shifted awkwardly. One of them, a cousin from out of state, whispered to another, "Where's Jason? Why isn't he doing this?" That was the moment Diane lost control of the narrative. She turned quickly. "Jason had a business emergency," she said. "He's in Europe. Couldn't make it back in time." It was a lie so brittle it cracked on impact. A few guests overheard and started whispering. One woman asked Greg's mother why the father of the bride wasn't present. Leslie just shrugged. By 3:45, people were seated. The officiant was checking his watch. The string quartet played the same loop of soft piano music so many times that even the cellist looked bored. Natalie stood near the edge of the entryway in her dress. Lace, elegant, understated. She looked like someone preparing for battle. Diane stood beside her, trying to get Alan to stand straight. He'd been shoved into his tuxedo and splashed with cold water, but he still looked like a man who'd barely survived the wreck. Natalie gave him a look, flat, unreadable. "Can you walk in a straight line?" she asked. "Sweetheart," Alan slurred, barely above a whisper. "This is your big day. I'm gonna nail it." He winked. She didn't answer, just turned away and grabbed her bouquet. The photographer stepped back, sensing the tension. Diane hovered behind them, her smile tight and panicked. The music shifted. The doors opened. Everyone rose. But Natalie didn't move. She stood still, gripping the bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white. Alan reached for her arm, trying to link it through his. She flinched away. And then, without a word, she stepped forward on her own. The guests gasped, not loud, but enough. Chairs creaked. Phones wavered mid-air. The quartet stumbled for a beat before regaining rhythm. Natalie walked herself down the aisle. No father. No escort. No speech. Just her and the soft echo of heels on the stone path. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't grand. But it was clear. Halfway to the altar, she caught Greg's eyes. He didn't smile. Just nodded once, slow and understanding, like he knew this moment would haunt them in photos forever. Alan stood frozen by the doors. Diane hissed something at him, but he just stumbled into a seat in the back row, wiping his forehead with a wrinkled napkin. When Natalie reached the altar, the officiant cleared his throat. "Who gives this woman?" But no one answered, so he skipped it. The ceremony limped on. Vows were rushed. Rings were dropped, twice. The mic cut out halfway through Greg's speech. Natalie didn't cry, didn't laugh. She just kept looking at the crowd like she couldn't find the person she expected to see. By the end, everyone clapped politely. But it wasn't joy. It was relief. Relief that the whole thing hadn't fallen apart entirely. Not yet, anyway. The reception hall was stunning. Gold-rimmed glasses, white linen tablecloths, hanging fairy lights. Everything Diane had obsessed over for the past year was in place. But it felt wrong, like a stage play performed with the wrong cast. After the ceremony, guests trickled inside, murmuring politely, avoiding the elephant in the room. Everyone had seen it. The walk. Alone. No Alan. No Jason. Natalie sat at the head table, bouquet limp in her lap. Greg beside her, quiet, sipping from his water like it might turn into something stronger if he stared hard enough. Across the room, Alan was nowhere to be seen. Until he was. He stumbled in through a side door, 10 minutes late to the grand entrance that never happened. He had changed out of his tux jacket and wore just the white shirt, already stained under the arms. He walked like a man trying to remember how feet worked. He shuffled up to Natalie's side, leaned down, whispered something. No reaction. She didn't even turn. She just stood, holding her dress in one hand, and walked to the center of the floor. Alone again. The DJ fumbled, then started the father-daughter song that had been chosen months ago. You'll Be in My Heart by Phil Collins. Corny, maybe, but it was supposed to mean something. Natalie didn't dance. She just stood there for a moment, blinking against the lights, then turned and walked off the floor. Someone clapped once. It died immediately. Alan stood frozen, arm half raised, like he'd expected to be pulled in. Diane sat at the front table, wine glass shaking slightly as she set it down too hard. The photographer hesitated, then lowered the camera. There was nothing to capture. At her table, Natalie quietly said, "Please don't make a scene." No one responded. The energy drained from the room like someone pulled the plug. You could feel it, the unraveling. Greg's dad leaned over and whispered to his wife. She walked alone twice now. Think she'll do it a third time? She elbowed him, but she didn't disagree. Meanwhile, Alan made his way to the bar, ordered something brown and cheap. The bartender gave him a look that said, "We have rules here," but poured it anyway. The toasts were supposed to start at 7. No one moved. Diane approached the mic eventually, clearing her throat like it might remove the tension from the air. "I just want to say," she began, smile forced, "that despite a few hiccups, today is still a celebration, a day of love." Behind her, Alan burped quietly into his drink. Natalie didn't listen. She was staring at her phone, scrolling through something no one else could see. Every now and then, she blinked a little too long, like she was pushing back tears. And Diane? She just kept talking, rambling, filling the silence with meaningless words. "We are so proud of Natalie," she said, "and we're so grateful to have Alan here with us. It means a lot that he could make it." That was the final straw for someone. Sam, Greg's best man, leaned toward Natalie and whispered something. Her expression cracked, just for a second. Then she nodded. "No more speeches," she said. Not loudly, not angrily, just with the kind of finality that ended discussions. Diane didn't hear her, or pretended not to. She continued, "And even though Jason couldn't be here tonight due to business overseas," Natalie stood. Everyone froze. She walked to the mic, took it gently from her mother's hand, and said, "Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the dinner. That's all." Then she handed it back, turned, and walked straight out of the room. Greg followed without a word. The door swung shut behind them. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It wasn't the sound of a finished celebration. It was the sound of a wedding quietly falling apart. No bouquet toss, no first dance, no cake cutting, just awkward conversation, half-eaten entrees, and Alan hunched at the bar, drinking like he wasn't supposed to be there. Diane sat frozen in her seat, blinking too fast, as if the whole thing might rewind if she just didn't move. But it wouldn't. The night was done. Not officially, but emotionally finished. It started with a toast. Not a planned one. Not on the itinerary Diane had printed out in pastel fonts and tucked into every napkin fold. No, this one came from the back corner of the room, where Alan had posted up near the open bar, nursing his third, maybe fourth, whiskey. People were picking at their food. The band was on break. The energy had bottomed out. That's when Alan stumbled to his feet, glass raised high like he was rallying troops instead of guests at a crumbling wedding. "Hey," he said, slurring slightly but still loud enough to silence the forks. Can I just say something?" Diane's eyes widened. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Natalie wasn't in the room. She'd gone outside with Greg 20 minutes ago, probably to cry, scream, or both. Alan didn't care. "I just want to say," he continued, swaying a bit, "I'm real honored to be here today. I mean that, real honored. Being asked to walk my daughter down the aisle? That's big. That's like, it's a moment. A damn moment." He paused, and some polite soul in the crowd gave a single clap. It died quickly. "I know I ain't been perfect," he said, his voice wobbling like a loose wheel. "But I came. I showed up. And you know what? I did it because Diane asked me to. Not 'cause I'm her real dad or whatever." The room froze, literally froze. Diane's wine glass slipped slightly from her hand. Someone coughed. A knife clattered to a plate. Alan kept going, oblivious. "I mean, she told me I should come. Said it'd mean a lot. Said it'd be good for Natalie to see her biological father at her wedding." He chuckled, bitter and drunk. "But hell, I ain't even sure I am her father. Never did the math, never asked the questions. Diane just wanted a face for the aisle." He took a long sip. "So here I am. The face." At another table, someone muttered, "What the hell?" The sound system crackled as a mic somewhere nearby picked up feedback. No one moved. No one intervened. Alan looked around, confused by the silence. "I'm just saying, man. I didn't raise her. Jason did. That guy. He was there. Me? I was not." He laughed, empty and tired. "But I guess that don't matter anymore." Then he sat down. Or rather, collapsed into a chair, spilling a bit of his drink on the tablecloth. For a moment, no one reacted. Then Natalie walked in. She stopped cold when she saw the expressions. The silence. Diane's pale face. Alan hunched over like a washed-up stage actor who flubbed his last line. "What happened?" she asked. Nobody answered. She turned to Diane. "What happened?" Diane stood slowly. Her face tried to recover its usual gloss, but the cracks were too wide now. "It was just a small confusion," she said weakly. "Alan's had a little too much to drink." Natalie looked at him, then back at her mother. "Did you tell him to come?" Diane faltered. "Sweetheart, I thought it would make you happy. I thought. Did you tell him to lie?" Natalie's voice was quiet, flat, dangerous. Diane didn't answer. "Did you lie to me?" Natalie asked again. "Did you bring him here? Tell everyone he was my father, just so you could pretend this day looked the way you wanted?" Diane's eyes filled, but not with guilt, with panic, with exposure. "I didn't think it would matter," she whispered. "You always wanted that moment. Walking down the aisle with your dad." "I wanted it with Jason," Natalie snapped. "I never said I wanted it with him." Now the silence broke. A few guests stood awkwardly, murmuring goodbyes. Chairs scraped across the floor. Someone wrapped up a centerpiece in a cloth napkin and made a beeline for the exit. Natalie stood completely still. Then slowly, she turned to Alan. "Are you my father?" He blinked at her, shrugged. "Hell, kid. I don't know." She nodded once. Just once. Then she walked out of the room. Not rushed. Not sobbing. Just done. Diane chased after her. Greg followed, mouthing apologies to the remaining guests. Alan stayed in his seat, staring at the wall like it might eventually offer him an answer. One by one, the guests left. No bouquet toss. No dancing. No more drinks. Just a half-finished cake. Melting. And Diane, sobbing outside the venue while her daughter sat in a parked car down the drive, staring out the window like she was watching the wreckage of her own life in slow motion. There was no announcement. No formal end to the evening. Just a slow, quiet disintegration of everything they tried to fake. Positano was quiet in the early morning. That soft, golden quiet that doesn't ask questions or offer apologies. The kind Jason Bennett had waited most of his life to feel. He sat on a small balcony, espresso in hand, legs crossed, eyes on the sea. Below, the town was waking up. Locals sweeping storefronts, scooters buzzing along stone roads, tourists snapping photos they'd forget to print. Jason didn't look at his phone. Not yet. It was still face down on the table beside him, next to a half-eaten pastry and a worn leather notebook. He had written exactly one line in it the night before. I didn't walk her down the aisle, but I walked away. He didn't need to write more. It had been 3 days since the wedding, the one he had paid for, prepared for, and ultimately abandoned. And now, finally, the world had caught up. When he flipped the phone over, it lit up like a storm. 38 missed calls, 17 voicemails, a text from Diane at 3:14 a.m. Subject line only, "Please." Jason scrolled. Natalie had written too. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Another came 10 minutes later. "He's not my father. He admitted it. I'm so sorry. Please, please call me." More followed. A flood. A tsunami of desperation typed into tiny gray bubbles. One voicemail from Diane was 3 minutes long. She sobbed through most of it. Said things like, "I never meant for it to go that far. And I thought you'd understand. And you're still her father, Jason. You always were." Jason played it once, then deleted it. He opened Natalie's last message. It read, "I don't want Alan. I want you. I was stupid and selfish and I listened to Mom because she made it sound like this fairy tale moment. I never stopped needing you. Please talk to me." He sat there a long time after that. The sun crawled higher over the water. A pair of newlyweds passed beneath the balcony, laughing and holding hands, lost in their own tiny orbit. Jason sipped the last of his espresso and thought about all the things he could say. He could tell her about the toast he never gave. He could remind her of that school play where she forgot her lines and ran off stage until he pulled her back and whispered, "You've got this, kiddo." He could explain how hard it had been to walk out that morning, how much he'd wanted to be wrong about her choice. But then he pictured the dinner table. The words, "I want my real dad," and he realized something. It wasn't about rage. It wasn't about revenge. It was about space. The space he had never claimed for himself. The space that had always been filled with other people's needs. Diane's demands. Natalie's expectations. Alan's absence. He opened his photo app. Scrolled past every wedding planning screenshot, the tux-fitting photo, the hotel confirmation emails. Then he stopped. A new album. He titled it Freedom. The first picture he added was the view from his balcony. Blue sea, terracotta rooftops, sunlight breaking through a cloud. No faces. No names. Just proof he was here, alive, outside the frame of the life he used to bend himself into. He smiled. Just barely. And then, without fanfare, he opened the message from Natalie. Read it again. Deleted it. Not out of cruelty. Out of necessity. Some silences weren't punishment. Some silences were peace. He looked up at the sky, stretched his arms, and stood. The notebook on the table fluttered open in the breeze. The next blank page stared up at him. Jason pulled out his pen, wrote 2 new words beneath his last line. "And I didn't look back." Jason Bennett disappeared without fanfare. No social media post. No final phone call. No dramatic confrontation. Just a suitcase, a one-way ticket, and a choice. Natalie never got another message. Not a reply, not a forwarded email, not even a return envelope. For a while, she tried, sending photos, long confessions, even a voicemail on Father's Day that ended in tears and silence. Diane told anyone who'd listened that Jason had lost himself, that he was going through something, that maybe he'd come around. But she knew better. Jason hadn't lost himself. He'd found something. Something no one in that house ever gave him freely. A life outside their orbit. Word spread quietly that the wedding hadn't gone well. Photos were scarce. The video never got edited. Guests who were there mostly said the same thing. Beautiful venue. Strange energy. As for Alan, he went back to wherever he came from. A few weeks later, Natalie blocked his number. She didn't announce it. She just stopped picking up. And Jason? He lived quietly. Italy for the fall, Vermont in winter. He found joy in small things. Cappuccinos, old books, the ocean on mornings no one expected him to show up for anything. He never stopped being a father. He just stopped performing like one for people who saw him as optional. No one ever figured out the moment he stopped waiting to be seen. But Jason knew. It was the second Natalie called another man real dad. And that was the moment he walked away. Not in bitterness, but in truth.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.